The wind howled like a wounded wolf across the Colorado plains, driving sheets of snow against the weathered logs of the solitary cabin. February 1887 had brought the worst blizzard in a decade, and the world had shrunk to nothing but white fury and bone-deep cold. The cabin stood defiant against nature's wrath, a tiny island of warmth in an ocean of ice, its chimney sending up a thin column of smoke that was immediately torn away by the gale. Inside, Lillian Hayes moved with practiced efficiency, her hands steady despite the arthritis that had begun to plague her joints. At 52, she was still strong, her body shaped by years of frontier living. Her graying hair, once the color of autumn wheat, was pulled back in a severe bun, and her blue eyes held the quiet determination of a woman who had learned to survive alone. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the rough-hewn furniture and the single photograph on the mantel. Colonel William Hayes in his cavalry uniform. Forever young, forever brave, forever gone. 5 years. 5 winters since the letter had arrived, written in the chaplain's careful hand. Died heroically at Devil's Canyon, leading his men against overwhelming odds. She had memorized every word, could still feel the paper trembling in her hands. The widow's pension kept food on her table, but nothing could fill the silence that pressed against the walls of her home like the snow outside. The horses needed tending. Lillian wrapped herself in William's old army coat, still the warmest thing she owned, and pushed against the door. The wind fought her, trying to slam it shut, but she was Colorado tough, bred from pioneer stock. Her father had brought the family west in '49 chasing gold and finding only hardship, but hardship had made her strong. The path to the barn was invisible beneath the drifts, but her feet knew the way. 20 paces straight, then bare left around the woodpile. The snow stung her face like needles, and she squinted against the white blindness. That's when she saw it, a dark shape against the endless white, too large to be adrift, too still to be alive. Her first thought was practical, a dead deer, perhaps, or a wolf, but as she drew closer, her breath caught. It was a man, face down in the snow, his clothes crusted with ice. One arm was flung out as if he'd been crawling toward her door when the cold finally won. Lillian had seen enough death to know its face, but something made her kneel beside the still form. Maybe it was the quality of the coat, good wool, not homespun. Maybe it was the worn leather of his boots, speaking of long miles traveled. Or maybe it was simply that no one deserved to die alone in the snow, forgotten and unmourned. She turned him over, grunting with the effort. Ice had formed on his mustache and in the hollows of his cheeks. But when she pressed her fingers to his throat, she felt it, the faintest flutter of a pulse, like a butterfly's wing against her skin. "Lord have mercy," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Getting him inside tested every ounce of her strength. She grabbed him under the arms and pulled, her boots slipping in the snow, her back screaming protest. Inch by inch, she dragged him across the threshold, leaving a dark trail in the white. His body was dead weight, frozen nearly solid, and by the time she got him to the hearth, she was gasping, her heart hammering against her ribs. She worked with desperate efficiency. The frozen clothes had to come off, modesty be damned when death was knocking. His fingers were white with frostbite, his lips blue. She wrapped him in every blanket she owned, built up the fire until it roared, and set water to boiling for hot compresses. As she worked, she studied his face, weather-beaten and lined, somewhere in his 40s. A scar ran through his left eyebrow, and his hands, when she chafed them between hers, were calloused from rope work. A cowboy, maybe, or a drifter caught by the storm. His gun belt, which she set aside, was well-maintained but not fancy. A working man's rig. Hours passed. The storm raged on, sealing them into their own small world. Lillian spooned warm broth between his lips, drop by precious drop, massaging his throat to help him swallow. She talked to him. Nonsense, mostly, just to fill the silence. Told him about the horses that still needed feeding, about the leak in the roof she'd been meaning to fix, about anything except the loneliness that had become her constant companion. When his eyes finally fluttered open, she was dozing in her chair, exhausted from her efforts. The slight movement woke her instantly. Frontier reflexes died hard. "Easy," she said, as he tried to sit up and failed. "You're safe. You're in my home." His eyes were gray as winter sky, clouded with confusion and pain. He worked his jaw, trying to speak, and she quickly brought water to his lips. "James," he whispered, his voice raw. "James Coleman. They call me Cole." "Lillian Hayes," she replied. "You nearly froze to death on my doorstep. Mr. Coleman." Recognition flickered across his features. And something else. Surprise. Fear. Hayes, Colonel William Hayes's widow. The familiar pain lanced through her chest. "You knew my husband?" Cole's eyes closed, and for a moment she thought he'd slipped back into unconsciousness. When he opened them again, they held a weight of sorrow that matched her own. "I served under him, ma'am, 7th Cavalry, Company B. I was at Devil's Canyon." Her heart stopped, then resumed with painful intensity. In 5 years, she'd never met anyone who'd been there, anyone who could tell her about William's last moments. The official report had been sparse on details, focused on honor and duty rather than the man she'd loved. "Tell me," she whispered, leaning forward. "Please, tell me everything." But Cole's face had gone pale beneath his weather-beaten tan. He struggled to sit up again, this time succeeding despite her protests. "Ma'am, I need to... There's something..." He swayed, catching himself against the chair. "The Apache, they're coming. William promised they wouldn't, but..." The words made no sense. "Mr. Coleman, you're confused. You need to rest." "No!" The vehemence in his voice startled her. "You don't understand. They're coming here. I was trying to warn, trying to get to Fort Lyon, but the storm..." He collapsed back, spent by the effort, but his eyes remained fixed on hers with desperate intensity. "What do you mean? William promised my husband is dead. Mr. Coleman. He died 5 years ago." Cole's face crumpled with something that looked terribly like pity. "Ma'am, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. But there are things about that day. Things the Army didn't tell you." Outside, the wind screamed its fury, shaking the cabin walls. But inside, a different kind of storm was brewing. One that would shake the foundations of everything Lillian Hayes believed about the man she'd mourned, the life she'd lived, and the choices that lay ahead. She pulled her chair closer, her hands steady despite the trembling in her chest. "Then perhaps, Mr. Coleman, it's time someone did." The fire crackled between them, casting wavering shadows on the walls. Somewhere in the darkness beyond her door, hoofbeats were already breaking through the storm, carrying ghosts and revelations toward a reckoning 5 years in the making. Cole's hands trembled as he wrapped them around the tin cup of coffee Lillian had pressed into his grip. The warmth seemed to give him strength, but his eyes remained haunted, focused on something far beyond the cabin walls. "Devil's Canyon," he began, his voice rough as sandpaper. "It wasn't supposed to be a battle, just a routine patrol, checking on settlers who'd reported Apache movement near their homesteads." Lillian sat rigid in her chair, her own coffee growing cold in her hands. Every word was precious, every detail a piece of the puzzle she'd been trying to solve for 5 years. "There were 50 of us," Cole continued. "Your husband led from the front, like always. He was a good officer, ma'am. The men respected him. But that day, something was different. He kept checking his timepiece, looking over his shoulder like he was expecting someone." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Outside, the storm had quieted to a steady snowfall, as if nature itself was listening. "We rode into the canyon just after noon. It's a box canyon. High walls on 3 sides. Only one way in or out. William ordered us deep inside before setting up camp. Some of the men questioned it. Sergeant McKenna, he'd been fighting Apache for 20 years, said it was a death trap. But William insisted. Cole's jaw tightened. They hit us at sunset. Came down from the rim rocks like ghosts. We never had a chance. But the report said William rallied the men. Lillian interjected, her voice barely above a whisper. Said he held the line while others escaped. The look Cole gave her was full of pain. Ma'am, I need you to understand something. I've carried this burden for 5 years. Wondered if I should have said something sooner, but I was just a private. And who would believe me over the official report? Tell me the truth. Mr. Coleman, I need to know. Cole set down his cup, his hands forming fists on his knees. When the Apache attacked, your husband was the first to run. He had his horse already saddled, like he'd been waiting for it. He rode straight through our lines, heading for the canyon mouth. No. The word came out flat. Automatic. You're mistaken. William would never... I saw him, ma'am. We all did. McKenna tried to rally us, but without an officer. It was chaos. Men screaming, horses bolting, Apache war cries echoing off the canyon walls. I took an arrow in the shoulder, fell off my mount, played dead under the bodies until nightfall. Lillian's cup shattered on the floor. Coffee spreading like dark blood across the boards. She didn't notice. You're lying. The army said... The army said what it needed to say. Cole interrupted gently. A colonel abandoning his men to slaughter, the scandal would have destroyed morale, maybe sparked a wider war. Easier to make him a hero, give his widow a pension, let the dead bury their secrets. If what you're saying is true, then how did William die? The army sent his effects, his sword. They found those abandoned near the canyon. His horse, too. Run to death. As for William himself, Cole paused, gathering himself. I spent months in the hospital at Fort Lyon recovering, heard things from the other wounded, stories the officers didn't want spread. He met her eyes directly. They court-martialed him in absentia, sentenced him to death for desertion and cowardice. A detail was sent to track him down, found him holed up in a mining camp near the border. But when they went to collect the body after the execution, it was gone. The sergeant in charge swore they'd shot him clean through the heart. But what? Lillian's voice was hollow, echoing from somewhere outside her body. But the Apache who were there, watching from the hills, they took the body. And 3 months later, traders started reporting seeing a white man riding with Red Sky's band, a man who matched William's description. The room spun. Lillian gripped the arms of her chair, her knuckles white. Everything she'd believed, every prayer she'd offered for her husband's soul, every night she'd cried herself to sleep, all built on lies. You're telling me my husband is alive, that he's been alive all this time, living with the Apache while I mourned him? I don't know for certain, Cole admitted. Could be just stories, rumors that grew in the telling, but the Apache who attacked us that day, it was too perfect, too coordinated, like someone had told them exactly where we'd be, when we'd be vulnerable. The implications hit her like a physical blow. You think William led them to you? You think he traded your lives for what? Safety, maybe. Gold. Who knows what bargains a desperate man might make? Cole struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. But ma'am, if the rumors are true, if he's really out there with Red Sky's band, then you need to know they've been moving east. The storms had me running for 3 days, trying to stay ahead of them. If they're coming here... A sound cut through his words, the distant drum of hoofbeats, muffled by snow but growing clearer. Lillian's blood turned to ice water in her veins. Cole lunged for his gun belt, but his frozen fingers fumbled with the buckle. Lillian moved faster, yanking the shotgun from above the door, checking the loads with practiced efficiency. How many? She asked, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Last I saw 50 warriors, maybe more." He finally got his Colt free, checking the cylinder. "Ma'am, if there's a root cellar, somewhere you can hide." "This is my home," she said firmly. "I've faced storms, wolves, claim jumpers, and 5 years of loneliness. I won't hide in my own house." The hoofbeats stopped. In the sudden silence, they could hear the creak of saddle leather, the soft nickering of horses, then, cutting through the night like a blade, Lillian Hayes. The voice froze her more thoroughly than any blizzard could. She knew that voice, had heard it whisper endearments in the dark, had heard it raised in laughter at Sunday socials, had heard it in her dreams for 5 long years. "It can't be," she breathed. "Don't open that door," Cole warned, raising his pistol. But she was already moving, drawn by a force stronger than reason. Her hand found the latch, lifted it. The door swung open, revealing the impossible. William Hayes sat atop a painted Apache pony, his cavalry uniform replaced by buckskin and fur. His face was leaner, harder, marked by wind and sun. War paint streaked his cheeks in the Apache style, and eagle feathers adorned his hair. But the eyes, those green eyes she'd gazed into on their wedding day, were unmistakably his. Behind him, arranged in a semicircle, sat 50 Apache warriors. Their faces were impassive, weapons held ready but not threatening. Yet. "Hello, Lily," William said, and his smile was a stranger's smile. "I've come home." The shotgun trembled in her hands. Part of her wanted to run to him, to touch his face and know this wasn't some fever dream. Another part wanted to pull the trigger, to give him the death he'd supposedly already died. "You're dead," she said instead, her voice cracking. "I mourned you. I wore black for a year. I loved you." Loved. William dismounted with easy grace, and she saw how naturally he moved in his Apache garb, how comfortable he seemed among the warriors. Past tense. "Lily, I suppose I deserve that." "You deserve a bullet," Cole growled from behind her. His Colt trained on William's chest. William's eyes flicked to the other man, and his smile grew cold. "Coleman, I should have known you'd survive. You always were too stubborn to die properly. Unlike the 49 men you left to slaughter. They were soldiers. They knew the risks." William took a step closer, and Lillian saw several warriors shift, hands moving to weapons. "I found something better than a soldier's death. Lily, I found a life worth living. Power, respect. The Apache understand strength in ways the army never could." "You betrayed your oath," Lillian said, finding her voice again. "You betrayed your men. You betrayed me." "I survived," William corrected. "And now I've come to offer you the same chance. The world is changing. Lily, the Apache know it. I know it. But there's still time for us, still places where we can live free. Come with me." The audacity of it stole her breath. 5 years of grief, of lonely nights and empty days. And he stood there offering her a place at his side as if he'd simply been delayed by weather. "You let me think you were dead," she said, each word precise as a bullet. "Do you know what that did to me? Do you even care?" For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, regret or just annoyance at her resistance. "I couldn't exactly send a letter. Could I, dear Lily, committed treason, living with Apache now? Hope you understand. I did what I had to do to survive. Now I'm giving you the same choice." "The William Hayes I married would have died with his men before abandoning them. The William Hayes you married was a fool," he snapped, the mask slipping. "Following orders, fighting for a country that sent us to die for land it had no right to take. The Apaches showed me a different way, a better way." Behind him, one of the warriors spoke in Apache. William replied in the same language, his pronunciation perfect. The intimacy of it, the ease with which he'd adopted their ways, drove home the truth more than any words could. The man she'd married was gone, replaced by this stranger wearing his face. I won't ask again. Lily, William said, his hand moving to rest on the knife at his belt. Come with me willingly, or I'll take you anyway. You're my wife. You belong with me. She belongs to no one. Cole stepped through the doorway, placing himself between Lillian and William. And you'll touch her over my dead body. William's laugh was ugly. That can be arranged. Private, though I thought you'd learned your lesson about standing against me at Devil's Canyon. The two men faced each other in the swirling snow. 5 years of betrayal and blood between them. Around them, the Apache warriors waited, patient as the mountains, ready to follow wherever this confrontation led. Lillian stood at the threshold of her home, shotgun in hand, caught between her past and an uncertain future. The wind picked up again, driving snow between the assembled riders, and somewhere in the darkness, a wolf howled, lonely, defiant, and free. William stepped forward, snow crunching beneath his moccasins. Up close, Lillian could see the changes 5 years had wrought. New scars on his neck, a hardness around his mouth, the lean muscle of a man who lived by raid and hunt rather than army rations. But it was his eyes that truly revealed the transformation. Where once they'd held warmth and humor, now they glittered with something cold and foreign. Move aside, Coleman, William commanded, his voice carrying the authority of a man used to being obeyed. This is between me and my wife. Your wife? Cole didn't budge. You gave up any claim to her when you left her to grieve a lie. William's hand tightened on his knife hilt. I said move. Stop! Lillian's voice cut through the tension like a blade. Both men turned to her, and she saw surprise flicker across William's painted face. The Lillian he'd left behind might have been cowed by his presence, might have deferred to his authority. But 5 years of solitary survival had forged her into something harder. She stepped around Cole, keeping the shotgun lowered but ready. You want to talk, William, then talk, but you'll do it inside, like civilized people. Your friends can wait out here. William barked something in Apache to the warriors. Several responded, their tones argumentative, but he silenced them with a sharp gesture. One warrior, older than the rest with a silver threading through his braids, spoke at length. William listened, then nodded. Red Sky says I have until the moon sets, he translated. After that, they'll assume you've refused and act accordingly. A Red Sky. Lillian's eyes found the older warrior. The war chief who burned the Garrett homestead, who killed those settlers at Willow Creek. The war chief who's kept me alive these 5 years. William corrected. Who treated me with more honor than my own people ever did. He dismounted and strode toward the cabin as if he owned it. Cole tensed, but Lillian touched his arm lightly. Let him come, she said quietly. I need to hear this. I need to understand. Inside, William moved through the space with eerie familiarity, his fingers trailing along the furniture, pausing at the photograph on the mantel. You kept this. I kept everything, Lillian replied, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Your uniform, your letters, your memory, though it seems that's all they were, memories of a man who never really existed. William set the photograph down carefully. He existed. He just evolved. Into what? Cole demanded, positioning himself by the window where he could watch the Apache outside. A traitor, a renegade. Into a survivor. William turned, and in the firelight, the paint on his face looked like blood. Do you know what it's like, Coleman, to realize your whole life has been a lie, every order followed, every battle fought, every friend lost, all for men in Washington who see us as expendable? So you became the very thing we were fighting against. I became free. William's voice rose with passion. The Apache don't send their warriors to die for politics or profit. They fight for family, for survival, for honor. When Red Sky found me after the execution squad did their work, when his medicine man brought me back from the edge of death, I finally understood what I'd been missing. Lillian found her voice. The execution squad. Then it's true, you were shot for desertion. Shot, yes. Court-martialed in a sham trial where I couldn't even speak for myself. He pulled aside his buckskin shirt, revealing a puckered scar just left of his heart. The bullet missed by inches. Red Sky's people found me, saw something in me worth saving. They gave me a second chance when my own people wanted me dead. Your own people wanted justice for 49 murdered soldiers. Cole spat. Murdered. William whirled on him. I tried to save them. I knew the attack was coming. Yes, I'll admit that. Red Sky had been watching the patrols for weeks. He came to me with an offer, lead the column into the canyon, and he'd spare my life. I tried to convince the others to change route, to go around, but that fool McKenna insisted on following orders. So you led them to slaughter to save your own skin. I made a choice. William's composure cracked, revealing the desperation beneath. Do you think it was easy? Do you think I don't see their faces every night, but I chose to live? And I won't apologize for that. Lillian watched her husband, this stranger wearing her husband's face, and felt something cold settle in her chest. And what about me, William? What choice did I have when they told me you died a hero? When I stood at your memorial service, accepting condolences from the other wives? When I spent 5 years believing I'd lost the love of my life to a noble cause? For the first time since his arrival, William looked genuinely affected. Lily, there was no way to tell you. How could I? You could have found a way, she said quietly. If I mattered to you at all, you would have found a way. You matter. That's why I'm here. He moved toward her, but stopped when Cole raised his pistol. I've established myself with Red Sky's band. I've proven my worth, earned their trust. They follow my strategies now. Listen to my counsel. Together, we've carved out a territory where we can live as we choose, and I want you there with me. Living as Apache raiding settlements, running from the army. Living free, he corrected. The wars are ending. Lily, the Apache know it, I know it, but there are places in the mountains, in Mexico, where we can build something new, a life without the constraints of what we used to call civilization. Lillian studied him. This painted warrior who had once worn dress blues and danced with her at the officers' ball. And if I refuse, his face hardened again. You're my wife. In Apache culture, that means something. Red Sky has given me permission to take you. Willing or not, he understands a man's need to have his woman with him. His woman. Lillian's grip tightened on the shotgun. Like property, like a horse or a rifle to be claimed. Like a wife who belongs with her husband. The William I married would never have spoken to me that way. The William you married was weak. The words exploded from him. He followed rules, took orders, never questioned why we were bleeding and dying on these God-forsaken plains. This William, the one standing before you, makes his own rules, and one of those rules is that I don't leave my wife behind. Cole laughed, a harsh sound. Some husband lets her mourn for 5 years while he plays Apache, only shows up when he decides he's lonely. Careful, private. My patience isn't infinite. Neither is mine, Lillian interjected. She moved to stand directly in front of William, close enough to see the lines wind and weather had carved into his face. Look at me, William, really look at me. Do you see the woman you married because she's gone, just as surely as the man I married is gone? 5 years of grief and survival changed me just as surely as your time with the Apache changed you. You're still my Lily. No. The word was quiet, but final. Lily died the day that letter came. I'm Lillian Hayes, widow, survivor, and my own woman. I belong to no one but myself. William's face contorted with frustration. You're being stubborn. You don't understand what you're refusing. The power I have now, the respect. I understand perfectly. Lillian stepped back, raising the shotgun slightly. You're offering me a life built on the blood of your own men. A life of running, of violence, of pretending the past never happened. That's not freedom. William, that's just another kind of prison. Outside, one of the warriors called out something in Apache, William replied sharply, then turned back to Lillian. Time's running short. This is your last chance. Lily, come with me willingly, or I'll have the warriors take you. Either way, you're leaving here tonight. Try it, Cole said quietly, moving to stand beside Lillian. Just try it. William's eyes flicked between them, and his expression darkened. I see. That's how it is. Then 5 years of mourning, and you've already taken up with another man, another soldier, no less. Don't, Lillian's voice carried warning. Don't you dare try to make this about jealousy or possession. Mr. Coleman showed up on my doorstep 3 days ago, half frozen and dying. I saved his life, just as someone once saved yours. The difference is, he told me the truth about who he was. The truth, William laughed bitterly. You want the truth. The truth is that civilization is a lie we tell ourselves while we steal land and slaughter anyone who resists. The Apache taught me to see clearly, to take what I need to survive. And what I need is you. What you need, Lillian said slowly, is to remember who you used to be. The man who wrote me poetry, who promised to love and protect me, who would have died before betraying his honor. That man is dead, William said flatly. I'm what's left, and I'm done asking. He raised his hand, clearly intending to signal the warriors. In that moment, Lillian saw her future crystallizing into 2 paths: captivity with a stranger who wore her husband's face, or a stand that might end in blood but would leave her freedom intact. She made her choice. The shotgun swung up, not aimed at William, but at the ceiling. The blast was deafening in the small cabin, showering them with splinters. Outside, horses whinnied and warriors shouted. The next one won't be a warning, she said calmly, breaking the gun open and replacing the spent shell. You want to take me, you'll have to kill me first. And explain to your Apache brothers how the great warrior William Hayes murdered his own wife. William's face had gone pale beneath the paint. Lily, don't! My name is Lillian, and I said no. They stood frozen in tableau. Lillian with her reloaded shotgun, Cole with his pistol trained on William, and William himself caught between the man he'd been and the man he'd become. Outside, the Apache waited with the patience of hunters, while inside, the ghosts of 49 dead soldiers seemed to crowd the small cabin, demanding their own justice. The moon hung low in the sky, its light filtering through the window, marking the passage of time toward whatever violent resolution awaited them. But for now, in this moment, Lillian Hayes stood her ground, a frontier woman defending the only thing she had left, her right to choose her own fate. The tension in the cabin stretched taut as a bowstring. William's hand hovered near his knife, while outside, the Apache warriors had dismounted, forming a loose circle around the building. The moon cast long shadows across the snow, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Then, unexpectedly, William smiled. Not the cold smile of the stranger he'd become, but something that almost resembled the man Lillian had married. You always were stronger than I gave you credit for, Lily, he said softly. Maybe that's what I missed most. Your spine. Before anyone could respond, the door pushed open. Red Sky himself entered, moving with the fluid grace of a man half his age. His weathered face showed no emotion, but his dark eyes took in everything. The weapons, the positions, the electric tension between the 3 people inside. He spoke to William in Apache, his voice measured and calm. William replied, gesturing toward Lillian and Cole. The conversation continued for several moments, and Lillian caught William's growing frustration in the sharp movements of his hands. Finally, Red Sky turned to Lillian. When he spoke, it was in accented but clear English. "You are the wife who mourns the dead." The question caught her off guard. I was, yes. "But he stands before you, not dead, yet you do not rejoice." His tone held genuine curiosity rather than judgment. "The man I mourned was honorable," Lillian replied carefully. "This man wears his face, but—" "Ah," Red Sky nodded slowly. "The spirit has changed. This happens. War makes new men, not always better men." William started to protest in Apache, but Red Sky silenced him with a gesture. The war chief studied Cole next, noting his defensive position, the steady hand on his weapon. "You guard this woman." "I stand with her," Cole corrected. "She doesn't need guarding." Something that might have been approval flickered in the old warrior's eyes. He turned back to William and spoke at length in Apache. William's face darkened with each word, his arguments growing more heated. But Red Sky remained unmoved. Finally, the war chief raised his hand for silence. "There is another way," he said in English, clearly wanting everyone to understand. "The old way, a challenge." William's eyes lit up. "Yes, combat. Let Coleman face me, and the winner." "Not as you think," Red Sky interrupted. "Not white man's duel with guns. Apache way, the trial of the circle." He explained a rope would be stretched in a circle in the snow, perhaps 20 feet across. 2 men would enter. Between them would be placed a single knife. No other weapons. The first to force his opponent from the circle or claim the knife and draw blood would be declared victor. "And if I win?" William asked eagerly. "The woman chooses freely to go or stay, but all must honor her choice." Red Sky's eyes were stern. "Even you, white Apache." "That's not—" "That is my judgment," Red Sky said with finality. "You say this man stole your woman. He says she is free. Let the spirits decide through combat, unless—" He paused, a slight smile playing at his lips. "Unless the great white Apache fears to face one soldier." It was a masterful manipulation. William's pride, always his weakness, flared instantly. "I fear no one, especially not him." "William, this is madness," Lillian protested. "You can't—" "Accept the challenge, Coleman." William cut her off. "Unless you're still the coward you were at Devil's Canyon." Cole's jaw tightened. "I wasn't the one who ran that day." "Then prove it." Lillian grabbed Cole's arm as he started forward. "You don't have to do this. You're still weak from the cold. Your hands—" "Are fine," he said quietly, flexing his fingers. They both knew he was lying. The frostbite had left them stiff and clumsy, but his eyes held hers steadily. "Trust me." "This is insane. William, please, just leave. Take your warriors and go. Haven't enough men died because of your choices?" "One more won't matter then," William said coldly. "What say you? Private, will you hide behind a woman's skirts or face me like a man?" Cole handed his pistol to Lillian. "I accept." The Apache warriors moved with practiced efficiency, producing a rope from somewhere and marking out a circle in the snow behind the cabin. Torches were lit and stuck in the ground, creating an arena of flickering light and shadow. The moon hung overhead like a cold eye, watching the ancient ritual play out on the Colorado plains. William stripped off his heavy coat and buckskin shirt, revealing a torso marked by scars and Apache tattoos. He moved through a series of stretches, limbering up with the ease of a man who'd spent 5 years living by physical prowess. Cole removed his own coat more slowly, and Lillian saw him wince as the movement pulled at still healing muscles. 3 days ago, he'd been near death. Now he was about to fight for both their lives. "You don't have to prove anything," she whispered urgently as he checked his boots for secure footing. "I'm not trying to prove anything," he replied, "but I won't let him take you. Not after—" He paused, then met her eyes. 3 days isn't long to know someone, but sometimes it's enough to know what's worth fighting for. Before she could respond, Red Sky called them forward. The knife, a wicked-looking Apache blade with a bone handle, was placed precisely in the center of the circle. William entered from one side, Cole from the other. "The rules are simple," Red Sky announced. "First blood, or first to leave the circle, loses. No honor in killing. This is for resolution, not revenge. Begin when ready." The two men circled each other warily. William moved with confidence, his bare feet finding easy purchase in the packed snow. Cole was more cautious, testing his footing, keeping his damaged hands close to his body. "You should have stayed dead, Coleman," William taunted, feinting toward the knife. "Would have saved yourself this humiliation." Cole didn't respond, keeping his eyes on William's center mass, watching for the telltale shift that would signal an attack. William lunged first, not for the knife, but directly at Cole, trying to use his superior conditioning to drive him from the circle immediately. Cole sidestepped, using William's momentum against him, nearly sending him stumbling over the rope boundary. The Apache murmured appreciatively. Even Lillian, her heart in her throat, recognized the skill in the movement. William recovered quickly, his face darkening.
"Lucky,"
he spat. They circled again. This time, both men darted for the knife simultaneously. They collided in the center, grappling for control. William's strength advantage showed immediately. He forced Cole backward, inch by inch toward the rope. But Cole had learned hard lessons about survival. As his heels touched the boundary, he suddenly dropped, pulling William over him and using his legs to launch the other man up and over. William flew through the air, landing hard just inside the opposite edge of the circle. Both men scrambled to their feet, breathing hard. The knife still lay in the center, unclaimed. "The cold slowed you down," William panted. "But you're still thinking like a soldier. Too predictable." He attacked again, this time with a series of Apache fighting techniques, low strikes, attempts to sweep Cole's legs, movements that flowed like water. Cole gave ground steadily, his stiff hands hampering his ability to grapple effectively. Then William made his move for the knife. He dove, fingers closing around the bone handle, coming up in a fluid motion with the blade flashing in the torchlight. "No!" Lillian started forward, but strong hands held her back. Red Sky had positioned two warriors to ensure no interference. Cole backpedaled as William advanced, the knife weaving patterns in the air between them. The circle was only 20 feet. There wasn't much room to retreat. "Going to run, Coleman," William taunted. "Just like you're claiming I did." "I didn't run," Cole said quietly. "I survived. Just like those of us who made it out of the canyon. We survived to tell the truth about what you did." "Truth?" William's face contorted. "You want to know the truth. The truth is I'm glad I ran, glad I didn't die for nothing in that worthless canyon. And now I'm going to finish what should have happened 5 years ago." He lunged, the knife driving toward Cole's midsection. Cole twisted, but not fast enough. The blade caught his shirt, parting fabric and drawing a line of blood along his ribs. "First blood," William shouted triumphantly. "I claim!" But Cole hadn't stopped moving. His twist became a spin, his elbow driving hard into William's extended arm. The knife flew from nerveless fingers, landing in the snow just inside the rope boundary. Both men looked at it, then at each other, then they moved. The collision was brutal. They went down hard, rolling through the center of the circle, each trying to gain advantage. William's Apache training showed, but Cole fought with the desperation of a man who had everything to lose. They broke apart, scrambling on hands and knees toward the knife. William was closer, faster. His hand closed on the handle, and Cole's boot caught him square in the jaw. William tumbled backward, the knife flying from his grasp again. This time, Cole was ready. Despite his damaged hands, he snatched the weapon from the air, rolling to his feet with the blade held steady. William rose more slowly, blood streaming from his nose. "You think you've won? You think she'll choose you?" a broken-down private with nothing to offer. I think, Cole said carefully, that she'll choose for herself. That's all she's asking for. Hayes, the right to choose. I'm her husband. You were. Cole's voice held surprising compassion. But that man died 5 years ago. You made sure of that when you rode away from Devil's Canyon. For a long moment, they stood facing each other, the deserter in Apache garb and the soldier who'd survived his betrayal. Around them, the warriors watched in silence, while Lillian held her breath, waiting for violence to explode again. Then, slowly, William's shoulders sagged. The fight seemed to drain out of him like water from a broken vessel. I can't go back, he said quietly. Even if I wanted to, they'd hang me. I know, Cole replied. I wanted something of my old life, something clean, something that remembered me as I was. But that's not fair to her. Cole said, she mourned you. Hayes, let her have her peace. William looked past him to Lillian, and for just a moment, she saw the man she'd married. Lost, afraid, human. Did you love me, Lily? He asked. Truly. With all my heart, she answered, tears freezing on her cheeks. But that man is gone. William, you made sure of that. He nodded slowly, then turned to Red Sky and spoke in Apache. The war chief listened, then nodded as well. It is decided, Red Sky announced. The spirits have spoken through combat. The woman remains free to choose her path. He gestured to his warriors, who began mounting their horses. William walked to his own mount, moving like a man twice his age. Before mounting, he turned back one last time. Be happy, Lily, he said simply. Be happier than I could have made you. Then he was on his horse, rejoining the Apache band. Red Sky paused beside Lillian as the others filed past. Your man fights with honor, he said, nodding toward Cole. And you, white woman, have strength. My warriors will remember. Will William be all right? The old chief's expression was unreadable. He chose his path. Now he must walk it to the end, as must we all. With that, he mounted and led his band into the night. The sound of hoofbeats faded gradually, swallowed by the vast silence of the plains, leaving behind only trampled snow and the echo of choices that could never be undone. The torch flames guttered and died, one by one, leaving only moonlight to illuminate the trampled circle in the snow. Lillian stood frozen, watching the last Apache warrior disappear over the rise, the sound of hoofbeats fading into memory. The night seemed impossibly quiet after the chaos, as if the very air was holding its breath. Cole swayed on his feet, one hand pressed to his bleeding side. The adrenaline that had sustained him through the fight was ebbing fast, leaving behind pain and exhaustion. The knife fell from his nerveless fingers into the snow. Let me see, Lillian said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She guided him back toward the cabin, supporting his weight when he stumbled. Inside, she lit every lamp, banishing the shadows that seemed to hold too many ghosts. Cole sank into a chair while she gathered her medical supplies, the same ones she'd used just days ago to save his life. Take off your shirt, she instructed, her tone brooking no argument. The cut along his ribs wasn't deep, but it was long and ugly. She cleaned it carefully, noting how he barely flinched despite what must have been considerable pain. His body told its own story. Scars from arrow wounds, from bullets, from 5 years of frontier survival. You could have been killed, she said quietly, spreading a salve over the wound. So could you, if I'd lost... That's not... She paused, her hands stilling on the bandage. Why did you do it? You barely know me. You owed me nothing. Cole caught her hand in his, despite the stiffness in his fingers. 3 days ago, you could have left me to die in the snow. Nobody would have known. Instead, you dragged a stranger into your home, spent hours warming me back to life, fed me from your own stores. You think I'd stand by and let him take you after that? It wasn't the same, wasn't it? His gray eyes held hers. You talked to me while I was unconscious. Told me about fixing the roof, about your horses, about the quilt your mother made. You shared your loneliness with a dying man because you couldn't bear to let anyone die alone and unheard. Lillian's throat tightened. She had talked to him, pouring out words to fill the terrible silence, never expecting him to remember. I heard every word, he continued softly. And I knew then that I'd fight anyone who tried to hurt you, even if that someone wore the face of a man you'd loved. Loved, she repeated, testing the past tense. I did love him. The William I married was gentle, funny, ambitious. He wrote the most terrible poetry. A watery laugh escaped her. He'd leave little verses on my pillow, comparing my eyes to cornflowers and my hair to wheat. They were awful, but they were his. She finished wrapping the bandage, her movements precise and careful. That man out there tonight, that wasn't William. Maybe Red Sky was right. War changes men, not always for the better. War reveals men, Cole corrected gently. Shows what was always there, buried deep, the capacity for courage or cowardice, honor or betrayal. And which are you? She asked, though she thought she already knew the answer. Just a man trying to do right, he said simply, not always succeeding, but trying. They sat in silence for a moment, the fire crackling in the hearth, outside. Wind whispered around the cabin corners, but it was a normal wind now, not the harbinger of ghosts and choices. He won't come back, Cole said finally. The Apache have strict codes about honor and defeat. Red Sky acknowledged the outcome. William will have to accept it or lose face among them. Where will they go? South, probably. Maybe into Mexico. The army's pushing hard from the east, and winter's closing the northern passes. They'll find somewhere to hole up until spring. And then, Cole shrugged, wincing at the movement. Who knows, the Apache wars are ending, one way or another. Men like William, caught between worlds, they'll have to choose a side eventually, or find a third path. Lillian moved to the window, looking out at the disturbed snow where the circle had been. I keep thinking I should feel guilty. My husband is alive, and I just sent him away. Your husband died 5 years ago. Cole reminded her. What you sent away was a stranger wearing his face. I know, but still. She wrapped her arms around herself. 5 years of grieving, of wearing black, of turning down suitors because I was faithful to a ghost. And all that time, he was out there, alive, choosing every day not to come back. Would it have been better if he'd actually died at Devil's Canyon? The question hung in the air like smoke. Lillian considered it. Really considered it. Yes, she said finally. Because then the man I loved would have died as himself. Not what he became. The William I married would have chosen death over dishonor. That's who I mourned. That's who deserved my tears. Cole stood carefully and moved to stand beside her at the window. So mourn him. The real William Hayes died 5 years ago. Probably the moment he made the deal with Red Sky. What walked in here tonight was something else. A ghost, Lillian murmured. A ghost wearing flesh. And you laid him to rest. She turned to look at him, this man who'd appeared in her life like salvation in a snowstorm. His face was drawn with pain and exhaustion, but his eyes were clear, steady, alive in a way William's hadn't been. What happens now? She asked. Now you heal. You stop defining yourself by loss and start remembering who Lillian Hayes is beyond being a widow. And you... He hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his features. I need to report to Fort Lyon. Let them know about the Apache movements. After that... He trailed off. After that? Depends on whether a certain woman might welcome a broken-down cavalry private coming to call. Once he's healed up proper, of course. Despite everything, Lillian felt a smile tugging at her lips. She might, assuming he can do better than comparing her eyes to cornflowers. "Ma'am, I wouldn't dare attempt poetry. I've seen what that leads to." The shared moment of levity felt like sunrise after the longest night, but reality crept back in, as it always did. "They'll ask questions at Fort Lyon," Lillian said, "about William. I'll tell them what they need to know about the Apache. The rest." Cole shrugged. "Man's officially dead. No point disturbing that particular grave. Won't that be lying to your superiors? Will it?" He turned to face her fully. "William Hayes, cavalry officer, husband of Lillian Hayes, died 5 years ago at Devil's Canyon. That's the truth. Isn't it what happened here tonight was just laying ghosts to rest?" She nodded slowly. Yes, I suppose it was." They stood together in comfortable silence, two survivors finding solace in shared understanding. Outside, the snow began to fall again, gentle now, covering the tracks and disturbances, erasing all evidence of the night's events. "You should rest," Lillian said eventually. "That wound needs time to heal. In the morning, I should tend to your horses. That's why you were heading out when you found me, wasn't it?" "They can wait another day. We both need to recover." Cole nodded, but made no move to leave. "Lillian, what he said about you taking up with another man, was the bitter rambling of a man who gave up any claim to jealousy when he chose to let me believe he was dead." She met his eyes directly. "But if you're asking if there's something between us, I don't know. It's been 3 days, Cole. 3 intense, impossible days. But still just 3 days." He agreed. "I'm not asking for promises, just the possibility of more days, normal days, without Apache warriors or resurrections or knife fights in the snow." "I think I'd like that," she admitted. "Normal days sound wonderful." Cole smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "Then I'll come calling, proper-like. Court you the way a woman deserves. Take you to church socials and barn dances. Bring you flowers instead of Apache war parties." "Flowers would be a nice change," she agreed, her own smile answering his. He moved toward the spare room, pausing at the doorway. "Lillian, thank you for saving my life, for trusting me with the truth, for letting me stand with you tonight." "Thank you," she replied, "for reminding me that I'm more than just a widow, that I'm still capable of choosing my own path." After he'd gone, Lillian stood alone in her cabin, but for the first time in 5 years, the solitude didn't feel like loneliness. She moved to the mantel, picking up the photograph of William in his uniform. The young man in the image smiled back at her. Frozen forever in that moment before Devil's Canyon, before choices and betrayals and transformations. "Goodbye, William," she whispered. "Rest now, both of you." She placed the photograph in a drawer, not discarding it but putting it where it belonged, in the past, with other memories of a life that was no longer hers. Tomorrow she would start fresh, no longer defined by loss but by possibility. Outside, the snow continued to fall, gentle and cleansing, covering the scars of the night and preparing the world for a new dawn. And somewhere in the darkness, moving south toward an uncertain future, the Apache band carried with them a man who had chosen survival over honor, never knowing that in trying to reclaim his past, he had finally set it free. The morning after the Apache departed, Lillian woke to a world transformed. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline landscape that sparkled under the winter sun. She stood at her window, coffee warming her hands, watching the pristine snow that had erased all evidence of the previous night's confrontation. It seemed fitting, a clean slate, unmarked and full of possibility. Cole emerged from the spare room, moving stiffly, his hand pressed to his bandaged side. Despite his injury, he insisted on helping with the morning chores. They worked in companionable silence, feeding the horses, checking the barn for storm damage, gathering eggs from the small coop. The ordinary tasks felt almost sacred after the supernatural quality of the night before. "I should head to Fort Lyon today," Cole said as they returned to the warmth of the cabin. "The commander needs to know about Red Sky's movements." Lillian nodded, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of being alone again. "Of course. Will you need supplies for the journey?" "Just my horse, if you can spare one. Mine didn't survive the storm." "Take Mercury. He's steady and knows the trail to the fort." They prepared for his departure with the same quiet efficiency that had marked their morning. Lillian packed food-dried beef, biscuits, a small jar of preserves. Cole checked his weapons, tested the saddle girths, made sure Mercury's shoes were secure. Neither spoke of what had passed between them, but the awareness hummed beneath every gesture. As Cole prepared to mount, Lillian touched his arm. "Be careful. Your wound." "We'll heal fine, thanks to your doctoring." He covered her hand with his. "Lillian, I meant what I said last night, about coming back." "I know." She managed a smile. "I'll be here." He swung into the saddle with only a slight grimace, touched his hat brim in farewell, and rode out. Lillian watched until he disappeared over the same rise that had swallowed the Apache band, then turned back to her empty cabin. But it didn't feel empty, not the way it had before. Cole's presence lingered in the chair he'd occupied, in the cup he'd drunk from, in the very air that seemed lighter somehow. She went about her day with renewed energy, cleaning spots that hadn't bothered her in months, reorganizing shelves, even humming as she worked. That afternoon, she made a decision. From the bottom of her trunk, she pulled out her morning dress, heavy black bombazine that had been her uniform for a full year after William's death. She held it up to the light, remembering the weight of it, the way it had made her feel shrouded even in bright sunshine. Without ceremony, she fed it to the fire. The fabric smoldered before catching, sending up black smoke that smelled of endings and new beginnings. She watched it burn, feeling something tight in her chest finally release. 5 years was long enough to grieve a ghost. Days passed. The snow began to melt, revealing patches of brown earth that promised spring. Lillian found herself checking the horizon more often than necessary, listening for hoofbeats that didn't come. She told herself Cole had duties, reports to file, orders to follow. The fort was 2 days' ride in good weather, longer if his wound troubled him. Still, each sunset without his return brought a flutter of the old loneliness. A week after his departure, she saw dust on the horizon. Her heart leaped, but she forced herself to continue hanging laundry, not wanting to seem too eager. The rider drew closer, and her anticipation curdled into disappointment. It wasn't Cole, but a stranger, his uniform marking him as Army. "Mrs. Hayes." The young corporal touched his cap. "I have a message from Private Coleman, ma'am." Her hand stilled on the wet sheet. Is he all right?" "Yes, ma'am. He's been detained at the fort. Colonel Morrison wanted a full debrief about the Apache encounter. Private Coleman asked me to let you know he'll return as soon as he's able." Relief flooded through her. "Thank you, Corporal. Will you come in? I have coffee on." The young soldier accepted gratefully, and over coffee and cornbread, he shared news from the fort. The Apache were indeed moving south. There had been skirmishes along the border, but Red Sky's band hadn't been involved. The Army was cautiously optimistic that this particular group was truly leaving the territory. Private Coleman's report was thorough, the corporal said. The colonel was impressed. There's talk of a commendation. "He deserves it," Lillian said quietly. The corporal left with a message for Cole, that she was well, that she understood, that she would wait. Simple words that carried so much more weight than their surface meaning. Another week crawled by. The snow retreated further, and Lillian saw the first green shoots pushing through the earth near the cabin's south wall. Life returning after the long winter. She tried not to read too much into the symbolism, But hope was a difficult thing to suppress once it had taken root. Then, on an afternoon when the sun actually held warmth, she heard it, the steady clip-clop of a horse approaching. This time, she didn't pretend indifference. She stepped onto the porch, shading her eyes against the light. It was Cole, riding Mercury. But he wasn't alone. A small wagon followed, driven by a man she didn't recognize, with another rider bringing up the rear. Cole dismounted carefully. She could see he was still favoring his side and climbed the porch steps. Lillian, just her name, but the way he said it held volumes. "Cole?" She wanted to say more, but the presence of the others held her back. "I brought some folks I thought you should meet," he said, gesturing to the wagon. "This is Sergeant McKenna's widow, Sarah, and their daughter, Mary." The woman who climbed down from the wagon was perhaps 40, with graying hair and kind eyes that held their own shadows of loss. The girl looked to be about 15, with her mother's delicate features and a shy smile. "Mrs. Hayes," Sarah McKenna said, extending her hand. "James, Private Coleman told me about you, about what happened here. I needed to meet you." Understanding dawned. "Your husband was at Devil's Canyon." He died trying to rally the men after—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "After the command structure failed." They stood in awkward silence for a moment before Lillian remembered her manners. "Please, come in. All of you. I'll make tea." The third rider turned out to be Thomas Garrett, whose family homestead had been burned by Red Sky's band the previous year. He was young, perhaps 25, with the haunted look of someone who'd seen too much too soon. They gathered in Lillian's small cabin, an unlikely assembly brought together by tragedy and its aftermath. As she served tea and what cake she had on hand, Cole explained, "I thought, after everything that happened, maybe it was time for some truth. Sarah deserved to know how her husband really died. And Thomas, he needed to understand why the Apache attacked his family's place." "It was William," Thomas said, his voice flat. "Wasn't it? He marked our homestead, told them we had supplies worth taking." Lillian's cup rattled against its saucer. "You can't know that." "Can't I?" His young face was hard. "We weren't random. Mrs. Hayes, none of the attacks were. They always knew exactly where to hit, when the men would be away, where the valuables were kept. Someone was feeding them information. Someone who knew Army patrol patterns and settler habits. My husband always wondered." Sarah added quietly, "Why Devil's Canyon? It made no tactical sense unless someone wanted that patrol eliminated." McKenna had been asking questions about the raids, noticed patterns. The weight of these revelations settled over Lillian like a shroud. Each piece of information painted a darker picture of the man she'd married. Not just a coward who'd run from battle, but an active traitor who'd traded lives for his own safety. "Why tell me this?" she asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Because you have a right to know," Cole said simply. "And because secrets fester. These folks have carried their suspicions alone for too long." "And what am I supposed to do with this knowledge?" Sarah reached across the table to touch her hand. "Nothing. Everything. Whatever brings you peace. We're not here to demand justice for dead men. Mrs. Hayes, we're here because Private Coleman thought we might help each other heal." "I don't understand." "My husband died believing in duty and honor," Sarah explained. "For years, I've wondered if he died for nothing, but meeting you, seeing that you've survived, that you're moving forward, it helps. It shows me that truth matters, that choosing right matters, even when it costs everything." Thomas nodded slowly. "My family's gone. Can't bring them back. But knowing why, knowing it wasn't just random violence, somehow that makes it easier to bear. And knowing the man responsible is gone, one way or another." They talked long into the afternoon, sharing stories, memories, grief, and gradually, something that might have been the beginning of healing. Sarah spoke of her husband with love and pride. Thomas remembered his little sister's laughter. Even Lillian found herself sharing memories of the William she'd first known. The man who'd existed before Devil's Canyon changed everything. As the sun began to sink, Sarah and Thomas prepared to leave. They were staying in town, would head back to their own lives in the morning. But connections had been forged, addresses exchanged, promises to write made. "Thank you," Sarah said, embracing Lillian at the door. "For your honesty, for your strength, for showing us that widowhood doesn't have to mean endless mourning." After they'd gone, Lillian and Cole sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. The silence between them was comfortable now, seasoned by shared understanding. "That was a risk," she said finally, "bringing them here." "Maybe, but I thought, you've been carrying this alone. They've been carrying their pieces alone. Sometimes sharing the load makes it lighter. And if they'd blamed me, if they'd held me responsible for William's actions, then we'd have dealt with that." He turned to look at her. "But I didn't think they would. Grief recognizes grief. Loss recognizes loss. You're all survivors of the same storm, just clinging to different pieces of wreckage." She considered this, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. "You're a philosopher now, Private Coleman. Just a man who's seen too much pain caused by secrets and lies." He shifted, wincing slightly. "Speaking of which, I have something else to tell you." Her heart stuttered. "Oh, I've been discharged, honorably, with commendation. The colonel said a man who'd survived Devil's Canyon and faced down Red Sky's band had earned his rest." "Discharged," she repeated. "So you're, what, a civilian now?" "As of yesterday." He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small leather pouch. "They gave me my final pay, plus a bonus for the intelligence about the Apache. It's not much, but it's enough to start over. Maybe buy a small spread, raise horses or cattle." "That sounds like a good life." "It does." He paused, gathering courage. "Sounds like the kind of life a man might want to share, if he found the right woman. One who wasn't afraid of hard work or hard truths. One who could look at a broken-down soldier and see possibility instead of just scars." Lillian's breath caught. "Cole." "I'm not proposing," he said quickly. "Not yet, but I am asking if you'd let me court you proper. If you'd consider building something new with me. When you're ready." She thought about it, really thought about it. The cabin that had been her refuge and prison for 5 years. The memories both bitter and sweet that lived in every corner. The photograph hidden in the drawer, a relic of a life that no longer existed. Then she thought about Cole's steady presence, his quiet strength, the way he'd stood between her and danger without hesitation, the way he'd brought truth instead of comfortable lies, healing instead of continued deception. "I think," she said slowly, "that I'd like that very much." His smile was like sunrise after the longest night. They sat together as darkness fell completely, two souls scarred by betrayal and loss, finding in each other the promise of something better, not a replacement for what was lost, but something entirely new, built on truth, tested by fire, and chosen freely. Inside the cabin, in its drawer, the photograph of William Hayes rested in permanent shadow. But outside, under stars that had witnessed everything and judged nothing, Lillian Hayes and James Coleman began to write a different story. One where love meant protection, not possession, where strength meant standing together, not standing alone, and where the greatest courage was found not in battle, but in choosing to trust again. Spring came to Colorado like a tentative promise, melting snow, revealing earth hungry for renewal. Lillian watched the transformation from her porch, a cup of coffee warming her hands, as she had every morning for 6 weeks now. But unlike the solitary vigils of years past, she was no longer alone. Cole worked in the barn, the sound of his hammer ringing across the yard as he repaired winter damage. The rhythm was steady, dependable, much like the man himself. Their courtship had been proper, almost formal, belying the dramatic circumstances of their meeting. Cole came calling twice a week, bringing small gifts, wildflowers picked from the meadow, a new bridle for her mare, once a book of poetry that made them both laugh, remembering her stories about William's terrible verses. They took walks when weather permitted, attended church services in town, shared meals under the watchful eyes of neighbors who were equal parts curious and approving. The frontier had its own understanding of second chances. Everyone here had left something behind. Failure, loss, disappointed dreams. What mattered was what you built going forward, not what lay buried in your past. On this particular morning, Lillian's contemplation was interrupted by the sound of approaching riders, not the leisurely pace of social callers, but the urgent gallop of people with purpose. She set down her cup, hand moving instinctively toward the rifle that always stood ready by the door. 3 riders crested the hill, 2 men and a woman, all showing signs of hard travel. As they drew closer, Lillian recognized the lead rider with a shock that went through her like lightning. Mary. She stepped off the porch, shading her eyes against the morning sun. Mary Chen. The woman who dismounted was indeed Mary Chen, though the years had changed her. Once, she and Lillian had been neighbors, their husbands serving in the same unit. Mary's husband Robert had died in a skirmish 2 years before Devil's Canyon, leaving her to raise their son alone. The last Lillian had heard. Mary had moved back east to live with relatives. Lillian! Mary's embrace was fierce, desperate. Thank God you're still here. I didn't know where else to turn. What's wrong? What's happened? The 2 men remained mounted, and Lillian noticed they wore the rough clothes of miners or prospectors. Their faces were grim, watchful. It's my boy, Mary said, and tears spilled down her weathered cheeks. Samuel, he's gotten mixed up in something terrible. Cole emerged from the barn, taking in the scene with quick assessment. He moved to stand beside Lillian, a quiet support that Mary noticed with widened eyes. James Coleman. Lillian made the introduction. Mary Chen, an old friend. These gentlemen are... Pike Hutchinson, the older man said, touching his hat. This here's Josiah Wells. We run a small mining operation up near Cripple Creek. Your friend's boy has been working for us these past 6 months. Please, come inside, Lillian urged. You look exhausted. Once seated around her table, coffee poured and some food provided, Mary told her story. After Robert died, I couldn't manage alone. Took Samuel back to Boston. Lived with my sister, but he hated it there. The crowds, the constraints. He was his father's son, born for open sky. When he turned 18 last year, he lit out for Colorado without a word. I followed, of course, tracked him to the mining camps. Boys that age get wanderlust, Cole observed. Nothing unusual in that. No, Mary agreed. But Samuel, he fell in with bad company. There's a man, calls himself Dutch Brennan, runs a gang that preys on the mining camps. Protection rackets. Claim jumping. Worse. Samuel was just a guard at first, watching the miners' barracks, but Dutch saw something in him. His father's military training, maybe, or just his anger at the world, started grooming him for bigger things. Pike Hutchinson leaned forward. The boy's not bad at heart. Ma'am, seen him share his rations with hungry kids, stand up for the Chinese workers when others wouldn't, but Brennan's got his hooks in deep. What happened? Lillian asked, though she dreaded the answer. 3 nights ago, Brennan's gang hit the Coldwater Mining Company payroll wagon. 2 guards dead, 30,000 in gold stolen. Mary's voice broke. Samuel was identified as one of the raiders. There's a warrant out. They'll hang him if he's caught. The weight of maternal anguish filled the room. Lillian reached across to grasp Mary's hand, remembering the bright-eyed boy who'd played soldier with a wooden sword. Where is he now? Cole asked practically. Josiah Wells spoke for the first time. "Hold up with Brennan's gang in the old Travers Ranch, about 40 miles northwest of here. Adobe buildings, good defensive position. The law's gathering a posse, but it'll be a bloodbath when they go in." "Why come to me?" Lillian asked, though she suspected the answer. "Because you know that country," Mary said desperately. "Because your husband and mine rode together, bled together. Because I remember you talking sense into William when his temper got the better of him. I hoped maybe you could talk sense into Samuel, make him surrender before they kill him." Lillian felt Cole's eyes on her. The request was dangerous, possibly futile. But she saw in Mary's face the same desperation she'd felt when believing William dead. The same helpless love that would do anything to save what couldn't be saved. "Even if I could get close enough to talk to him, why would he listen to me? He was 13 when I last saw him." "He remembers you," Mary insisted. "Talked about Aunt Lillian, who made the best apple pie and let him ride her horses. You and William were the only family we had out here. Maybe that still means something." Cole stood abruptly. "I'll ready the horses." "Cole, no, this isn't your—" "Yes, it is." His voice was firm. "You're not riding into a nest of outlaws alone. We do this together or not at all." An hour later, they set out. Lillian, Cole, Mary, and the 2 miners. The sun climbed higher, beating down on the small party as they rode northwest into increasingly rough country. They stopped only to rest the horses, everyone aware that time was against them. The law wouldn't wait long before moving on Brennan's gang. As they rode, Mary filled in more details. Dutch Brennan was a former Confederate guerrilla who'd never stopped fighting his own version of the war. His gang numbered about 20, all men with nowhere else to go and nothing left to lose. Samuel had been drawn to Brennan's rhetoric about honor and brotherhood, finding in the gang the belonging he'd lost when his father died. "He's trying to prove himself," Mary said sadly. "Trying to be the man he thinks his father would have wanted. But Robert would have been horrified. He believed in duty. Yes, but duty to something greater than yourself, not to some outlaw's twisted code." The parallel to William wasn't lost on Lillian. Men seeking honor in all the wrong places, choosing paths that led only to destruction. She wondered if there was something in the frontier itself that broke men this way, or if it merely revealed what was already broken inside them. By late afternoon, they reached a ridge overlooking the Travers Ranch, the adobe buildings squatted in a valley below. Strategic and defensible, just as Wells had described. Men moved between the structures, and Lillian counted at least a dozen guards posted at various points. "How do we approach without getting shot?" Pike wondered aloud. Cole studied the layout with a soldier's eye. "We don't, not as a group, but one person, approaching openly under a white flag." "I'll go," Mary said immediately. "No." Lillian's voice was firm. "You're his mother. He'll see you coming and feel cornered, defensive. It needs to be someone he won't expect, someone who can surprise him into listening." "Lillian, no," Cole protested. But she was already pulling a white petticoat from her saddlebag, tying it to her rifle barrel. "I survived William and 50 Apache warriors. I can handle one confused boy and his outlaw friends." The argument was brief but fierce. In the end, practicality won. Lillian was the least threatening, the most likely to get close without triggering violence. Cole would position himself on the ridge with his rifle, ready to provide cover if needed. The others would wait, watch and pray. As Lillian rode down the slope, white flag high, she thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. William's choice at Devil's Canyon, her choice to save Cole from the snow, Samuel's choice to follow Dutch Brennan, each decision rippling outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. The outlaws saw her coming. Shouts went up, men scrambling for positions, but the white flag gave them pause, and curiosity won over hostility. By the time she reached the ranch's outer perimeter, a delegation had emerged to meet her. Dutch Brennan was immediately recognizable, not by any physical feature, But by the way the other men deferred to him, tall and lean, with prematurely gray hair and eyes like chips of flint, he wore his authority like a well-fitted coat. "Well now," he drawled, "what have we here, a lady come calling you lost, ma'am?" "I'm looking for Samuel Chen," Lillian said clearly. "I'd like to speak with him." Brennan's eyes narrowed. "And who might you be to young Samuel?" "An old friend of his family, someone who knew his father, someone who doesn't want to see him hang for your crimes." The temperature around them seemed to drop. Several men shifted, hands moving to weapons, but Brennan smiled, cold and amused. "My crimes, ma'am. We're all free men here, choosing our own path. No crime in that. There's crime in murder, in theft, in corrupting a grief-stricken boy who's looking for a father figure in all the wrong places." The smile vanished. "You've got sand, lady, I'll give you that, but you're about 2 seconds from overplaying your hand." "Let her talk to him. Dutch." The voice came from behind, and Lillian turned to see Samuel Chen emerging from one of the buildings. The boy she remembered was gone, replaced by a young man trying too hard to look dangerous. He wore his gun low like a gunfighter, his face shadowed by a hat pulled down tight. But his eyes, his father's eyes, held uncertainty beneath the bravado. "Aunt Lillian?" Disbelief colored his voice. "What are you doing here?" "Trying to save your life," she replied simply. "Your mother's worried sick. The law's coming. Samuel, this doesn't end well for anyone unless you make better choices than the men who came before you. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She dismounted, ignoring the guns trained on her, and walked straight to him. "I understand what it's like to lose someone you loved, to have your whole world torn apart. I understand the anger, the need to belong somewhere, anywhere. But this isn't the answer. Samuel, this isn't what your father would have wanted." "Don't talk about my father." The words burst out of him. "You didn't know him. Not really, none of you did. He died following orders, believing in a system that threw his life away for nothing. At least here, with Dutch. We make our own rules. We're not anyone's pawns." "You're right," Lillian said quietly, and she saw surprise flicker across his face. "Your father did die following orders. So did a lot of good men. Some died heroes, some died fools, and some, like my husband, made choices that turned them into something neither." She had the attention of everyone now, this unexpected philosophy from a middle-aged widow. "But here's what I learned. Samuel, and it cost me dearly to learn it. Running from one master to another isn't freedom. Trading the Army's orders for an outlaw's code isn't independence. It's just changing the color of your chains." Dutch Brennan laughed. "Pretty words, lady, but words don't put food in a man's belly or respect in his heart." "Neither does stolen gold," Lillian shot back. "Neither does the fear in honest men's eyes when you ride past. You've convinced this boy that you're offering him power, but all you're really offering is a different kind of death. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but soon. And his mother will mourn him just as I mourned William. Only she won't even have the comfort of believing he died for something meaningful." Samuel's facade cracked slightly. "She shouldn't have come. Should have stayed in Boston where it's safe." "A mother's love doesn't recognize safe," Lillian said gently. "She's up on that ridge right now, terrified, but here because you're her son. Just like she was there when you took your first steps, when you had nightmares about your father not coming home, when you needed someone to believe you could be more than your pain." The young man's hand trembled slightly on his gun butt. Around them, the outlaws watched with varying degrees of interest and impatience. This wasn't how they usually handled problems. "The posse's forming," Lillian continued. "Maybe 30 men, all armed, all angry about their friends killed in that payroll robbery. They'll come hard and fast, no quarter given. How many of these men around you will die for Dutch Brennan's vision of freedom? How many mothers will mourn? How many children grow up seeking their own misguided revenge?" "Enough." Brennan's voice cut like a whip. "Samuel, escort this woman back to her horse. She said her piece." But Samuel didn't move. He stood frozen between worlds, the boy who'd played at his father's feet and the man he was trying desperately to become. "There's another way," Lillian said urgently. "Surrender yourself. Turn witness against the gang. You're young. You were coerced. A good lawyer can argue for leniency. You can still have a life, Samuel, a real life. Not this shadow existence of violence and fear." "A life in prison," Brennan corrected coldly. "Or dancing at the end of a rope. Some choice you're offering, lady." "A life with the possibility of redemption," Lillian countered. "Of making amends. Of becoming the man your father actually was, not the bitter ghost you've created in his memory." Time seemed to stretch, taut as a bowstring. On the ridge, Cole waited with his rifle. In the valley, 20 outlaws watched their youngest member wrestle with decision, and in the space between heartbeats, Samuel Chen chose. His hand moved away from his gun. "She's right." The words were barely whispered, but they echoed like thunder. "This isn't what my father would have wanted. This isn't who I want to be." The explosion of movement was instantaneous. Brennan's hand flashed toward his pistol. Samuel, moving with his father's trained reflexes, shoved Lillian aside. Gunfire erupted from the ridge, Cole's rifle speaking with deadly precision. Men scattered, shouting, seeking cover. In the chaos, Lillian grabbed Samuel's arm. "The horses now." They ran, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Behind them, Brennan roared orders, but his men were in disarray, caught between the sniper on the ridge and their own confusion. Some fled, some fought, but none pursued the woman and young man racing for escape. They reached the horses as Cole's covering fire intensified. Lillian mounted, Samuel behind her, and they spurred toward the ridge. More shots rang out, but distance and dust provided cover. By the time they reached the others, the gunfire had dwindled to sporadic pops. Mary's reunion with her son was wordless, tearful, fierce. She clutched him as if she could physically hold him together, keep him from flying apart into the 1,000 broken pieces of a young man's disillusionment. "We need to move," Cole said urgently. "They'll regroup. Come after us." But as they prepared to ride, Pike Hutchinson pointed back toward the ranch. "Look!" Dust clouds rose from multiple directions. The posse, arriving sooner than expected. The outlaws, caught between sniper fire and approaching law, made the only choice left to them. They scattered like quail, every man for himself. Dutch Brennan's brotherhood dissolving into chaos and self-preservation. "Will they catch him?" Samuel asked, watching the destruction of what he'd thought was family. "Maybe," Cole replied. "Maybe not. Men like Brennan have a way of surviving, but his power here is broken. The gang's done." They rode hard for town. Samuel now mounted behind his mother, clinging to her as he hadn't since childhood. At the sheriff's office, he turned himself in with quiet dignity. The story that emerged of a young man deceived, of a mother's desperate intervention, of his choice to reject the gang before the final robbery, earned him sympathy, if not absolution. As Lillian had predicted, a good lawyer argued for leniency. Samuel Chen received 5 years, harsh, but not the rope. He would serve his time, pay his debt, and emerge with a chance to build something better. Standing outside the courthouse after the sentencing, Mary gripped Lillian's hands. "I can never repay you. Never." "You don't need to," Lillian assured her. "We've all been where Samuel was, standing at a crossroads, choosing between easy wrong and difficult right. Sometimes we just need someone to remind us which path leads home." That evening, Lillian and Cole sat once again on her porch, watching sunset paint the mountains. The day's events had left them both drained but oddly peaceful. "You took a terrible risk," Cole said finally, walking into that nest of vipers with nothing but words and hope. "I had more than that," Lillian corrected. "I had you on that ridge. I had the truth about where such choices lead, and I had faith that somewhere inside that angry young man, Robert Chen's son still existed. And if you'd been wrong, She considered this. Then I would have tried anyway, because Mary is my friend, because Samuel deserved a chance, because watching someone else's child make William's mistakes and doing nothing would have been its own kind of betrayal. Cole took her hand, their fingers intertwining with the ease of long practice now. "You saved him." "No," Lillian said softly. "He saved himself. I just reminded him he had the choice. We always have the choice." They sat in comfortable silence as stars emerged in the darkening sky. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, its own decisions. But tonight, they had the peace of choices well made, of loyalty honored, of love that protected rather than possessed. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, carrying passengers toward their own crossroads, their own moments of decision. And on a porch in Colorado, two people who had found each other in the aftermath of betrayal sat hand in hand. Proof that sometimes, if you were very lucky and very brave, choosing the difficult right led you exactly where you needed to be. The wedding took place on a perfect May morning, when the Colorado mountains wore crowns of snow while the valleys bloomed with wildflowers. The small church in town overflowed with neighbors, friends, and the scattered family that frontier life created from shared hardship and mutual survival. Lillian stood before the mirror in the vestry, adjusting the simple blue dress she'd chosen over traditional white. At 52, she felt no need for maiden pretense. This was not the nervous bride of decades past, but a woman who had walked through fire and emerged tempered rather than broken. Sarah McKenna, who had become a cherished friend since that day of shared truth, helped pin wildflowers in Lillian's graying hair. "You look radiant," she said softly, "like a woman who knows exactly what she's choosing." "I do know," Lillian replied. "That's the difference between first love and earned love. The first comes like spring rain, sudden and overwhelming. The second builds like a house board by board, nail by nail, with full knowledge of every strength and flaw in the foundation." Through the window, she could see Cole standing with Reverend Peterson, his weathered face calm, but his hands betraying nervousness as he adjusted his string tie for the dozenth time. He'd insisted on wearing his army uniform one last time, medals polished, bearing witness to the man he'd been and the honor he'd carried through Devil's Canyon and beyond. The church bell began to toll, and Lillian took a deep breath. This moment had been 6 months in coming, but in truth, it had been building since that night Cole faced down William and 50 Apache warriors for her freedom. Not because he owned her or claimed her, but because he believed she deserved the right to choose. As she walked down the aisle, Lillian saw the faces of their assembled community. Mary Chen had made the journey from Denver, where she now lived, to be near Samuel during his incarceration. Thomas Garrett stood with his new wife, building a fresh life from the ashes of tragedy. Pike Hutchinson and Josiah Wells had come down from the mining camps, their rough faces scrubbed clean for the occasion. But it was Cole's face that held her attention. When their eyes met, she saw in them the same wonder she'd seen that first morning when he'd awakened from near death in her cabin, as if he couldn't quite believe the gift life had given him, but was determined to prove worthy of it every single day. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but weighted with meaning for two people who understood the full import of words like honor and cherish. When Reverend Peterson pronounced them husband and wife, the cheer that went up could have been heard in the next county. The reception was held at the Hayes' cabin, now the Coleman homestead. Tables groaned under the weight of dishes brought by neighbors, each contribution a thread in the fabric of community that made frontier life bearable. Lillian moved through the crowd, accepting congratulations, sharing laughter, feeling a lightness she hadn't experienced in years. As the sun began to sink toward the mountains, she found herself standing where the combat circle had been that terrible winter night. The grass had grown over it, erasing all evidence of the confrontation that had changed everything. Only she and Cole knew the significance of this spot. "Regrets?" Cole asked, joining her with 2 glasses of punch. "None," she answered honestly. "You..." only that it took a blizzard and near death to bring me to your door." He paused, then added more seriously, "I know I can't replace what you lost. Lillian, I'm not trying to be William." "Good," she said firmly. "Because I didn't marry William. I married James Coleman, a man who tells the truth even when it's difficult, who stands up for what's right even when it's dangerous, and who sees me as a partner, not a possession." The celebration continued into the evening. Lanterns lit against the gathering dark, fiddle music spilling across the plains, but eventually the guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in what was now truly their home. As they prepared for bed, Lillian pulled out a wooden box she'd kept hidden. Inside lay William's photograph, his medals, the flag from his memorial service, all the trappings of a life built on lies. "I've been thinking about what to do with these," she said quietly. Cole studied the contents. "They're part of your history. No shame in that." "No, but they're not part of my future." She carried the box outside, Cole following, behind the barn. She'd prepared a small fire pit. One by one, she fed the items to the flames, not in anger, but with the solemnity of a ritual cleansing. The photograph curled and blackened, William's young face disappearing into smoke. The metals melted, their false honor running like tears. The flag burned brightest, its colors vivid for a moment before dissolving into ash. "For the 49 who didn't come home," Lillian murmured. "For the families who never knew the truth. For the woman I was who mourned a fiction. May they all find peace." Cole wrapped his arms around her from behind, and together they watched the fire consume the last physical remnants of William Hayes when it finally died to embers. Lillian felt something shift inside her chest, a door closing gently but firmly on a chapter of her life. Over the following months, the Coleman homestead became a beacon of stability in the changing frontier. The Indian Wars were winding down, the railroad bringing civilization closer every day. The Wild West that had shaped and broken so many was giving way to something more ordered, if less free. Cole proved to be a capable rancher, his military discipline translating well to the demands of livestock and land management. He had a way with horses that bordered on magical, and soon their small operation gained a reputation for quality mounts. Men came from 3 counties away to buy Coleman horses. Lillian found her own calling in unexpected ways. Her survival of the Apache encounter, her role in saving Samuel Chen, her transformation from grieving widow to frontier matriarch. These stories traveled. Young women, especially young widows, began seeking her counsel. She became known as someone who could speak hard truths with compassion, who understood that survival sometimes meant letting go of who you thought you were supposed to be. One autumn afternoon, as golden aspen leaves danced on the wind, a familiar figure appeared on the horizon. Lillian was hanging laundry when she saw the lone rider approaching, and something in the way he sat his horse made her heart skip. It was Red Sky. Cole emerged from the barn, rifle in hand, but Lillian touched his arm. "Wait, let's see what he wants." The old Apache war chief rode up slowly, his hands visible and empty. Age had touched him more deeply in the 1.5 years since their last meeting. His hair was white now, his face more deeply lined, but his eyes remained sharp, missing nothing. "White woman who stands strong." He greeted her formally. "I bring news you should hear." They invited him to dismount, offered water for him and his horse. He accepted with grave courtesy, then spoke words that would finally close the last chapter of William Hayes's story. "The man you called husband is dead," Red Sky said simply. "Killed in Mexico, fighting federales who attacked our camp. He died, well, protected the children during the evacuation. Perhaps he remembered at the end who he once was." Lillian felt no grief, only a quiet settling, like sediment finding its level in still water. "Thank you for telling me. He spoke of you before the end, said to tell you he understood now what he had thrown away. Said..." Red Sky paused, choosing words carefully. Said love should lift up, not hold down, should protect, not possess. He learned too late. Maybe not too late, Lillian said softly. If he protected those children, if he finally chose others over himself, then perhaps he found redemption after all. Red Sky nodded slowly. The spirit can change, even at the last moment. This is what I believe. He stood to leave, then paused. Your new man, he has honor. The warriors remember how he fought, how he accepted our judgment. You chose well. We chose each other, Lillian corrected gently. That makes all the difference? After Red Sky departed, Lillian and Cole stood together in the dying light. The news of William's death, his true death, seemed to release something in the air, like the breaking of a fever. How do you feel? Cole asked. Lillian considered the question seriously. Complete, she said finally. Like all the circles have closed, all the debts paid. He's not a ghost anymore. Just a lesson learned. That night, as they lay in their bed listening to coyotes sing to the moon, Lillian reflected on the journey that had brought her here, from the desperate woman dragging a frozen stranger from the snow to the survivor who had faced down her past and chosen her future, from isolation to community, from grief to joy, from the prison of old love to the freedom of new. I used to think strength meant standing alone, she murmured into the darkness, bearing whatever came without complaint or help. But that's not strength. It's just stubbornness dressed up as virtue. What's strength, then? Cole asked, his voice rumbling against her ear where she lay on his chest. Knowing when to stand and when to bend, when to fight and when to accept, when to hold on and when to let go. She rose up on one elbow to look at him in the moonlight. Choosing love after betrayal, that's strength. Building trust from the ashes of deception. Making yourself vulnerable again when you know exactly how much it can cost. By that measure, you're the strongest person I know. We both are, she corrected. We both chose to try again. That's the bravest thing anyone can do. Outside, the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the scent of sage and distant snow. But inside the cabin, two souls who had found each other in the midst of winter's fury lay warm and safe. Proof that sometimes the greatest adventures weren't about riding into the sunset alone, but about having the courage to ride toward dawn together. In the years that followed, the Coleman homestead became a landmark in the changing landscape of Colorado. Lillian's garden grew legendary. Cole's horses won prizes at territorial fairs, and their home remained open to those who needed shelter, counsel, or simply the comfort of knowing that second chances were possible. They never had children of their own, but they helped raise many orphans of the frontier wars. Young people like Samuel Chen who needed guidance back from dark paths. Neighbors' children who came for Lillian's cookies and stayed for Cole's stories. Their legacy was written not in blood, but in the lives they touched, the examples they set, the proof they offered that love could be both passionate and respectful, both deep and free. When historians later wrote about the settling of the West, they focused on the grand narratives, the railroad barons, the Indian chiefs, the legendary outlaws. But the true story of the frontier was written in smaller script, in the lives of people like Lillian and Cole Coleman, who faced the wilderness within themselves and chose to build something better from whatever remained. Their greatest adventure wasn't surviving blizzards or Apache encounters or the ghosts of the past. It was the quiet heroism of daily choice, choosing trust over suspicion, hope over bitterness, love over fear. In a land where the strong took what they wanted, they proved that true strength lay in giving, in protecting, in lifting others up rather than holding them down. And in the end, that was the most revolutionary act of all. Thank you for listening to this story from the Wild West. Where are you enjoying this tale? Please comment below and let us know your location so we can connect with listeners around the world. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel and share your thoughts about Lillian and Cole's journey. What did their story mean to you?